Hey everybody, it's Professor Snart here checking in. I'm feeling a little behind these days. It's Friday morning when I'm recording this, just kind of catching up into our Unit 6, and we'll take a quick look at Unit 7 here. Just a matter of being really busy at work, a few sort of unusual things going on, or things that aren't typical as I'm getting ready for a conference that's coming up in March. I'm chairing a search committee for a new full-time hire in the English department, just lots of stuff. Nothing terrible. It's actually all really fun work. And I think, as I mentioned before, not feeling 100%, which always makes keeping up a little bit difficult. So let's take a quick look at our due dates. I'll jump back to Unit 6 just to make sure we're all on the same page, and then jump into Unit 7. So it is Friday, March 1st. Hard to believe it's March, still 20 degrees outside. But here we are. It'll be spring break before we know it, I hope. So we're looking at finishing up, making sure that everyone has posted their final projects correctly, and please double check to make sure that your project displays correctly. Keeping in mind that even if you've say like embedded a slide deck on your portfolio page, for example, it might show up correctly to you, but when you share that portfolio page just out to us as a class, I can see your page, but unless you've set the sharing settings for that embedded slide deck or document or whatever it is, you have to set those sharing settings too. If it's just closed off to you, then all we'll see is this little window that says like request access. So one good way to double check this, and this works in Chrome, I think there's probably versions that you can do in other browsers too, is that if you do, God, I can't remember what the keys are. Hopefully this works. Yeah. Here I'm back. So for me, it's Shift-Control-N opens up a new Chrome window. It's just blank. You can see here. There's a little guy up in the corner with hat and sort of sunglasses type thing that you can't see, but it's called an incognito window. The benefit here is that it makes sure that you're not signed in to any account, like your Google account, because what happens if you're on your portfolio page and you look to see, oh yeah, my slide deck shows correctly. Well, it's because Chrome knows that you're signed in, so it knows to show that to you. But type or paste your URL, your portfolio URL, into this incognito window. I know it doesn't look like anything here, but it's just a blank browser window. Paste the URL and you will see it like everybody else sees it. Not as if you're logged in. So anyway, it's really important to double check to make sure that what you see logged in is actually the same as what everybody else will see when, of course, we're not logged into your account stuff. Then we'll turn around, finish up with our short fiction, and move into poetry. We'll spend a couple of units doing that, spring break, and then we move into the drama section of our class. So moving right along. Okay, so real quick then, back into Unit 6, catching up. So these are the various links or whatever that I've been able to grab from either Unit 5 or what people have posted here. I think that catches pretty much everybody, but do make sure that I've got the correct link. Sometimes things change, as a project unfolds. Or you'd rather have people going to a website versus, say, the slide deck that I've got. As long as it is accessible, that's the main thing. So again, you can double check that, use that incognito window just to make sure that what we're seeing is what you want us to see. Make sure that you've done your individual reflection that's part of the group project. So again, posting your project URL or the link to it or whatever it ended up being here in the discussion board, and then building out a new portfolio page for yourself. So each individual does this, not each group. And then just sort of talk about like your role, how it turned out, what you might do differently, in a paragraph or two, sort of reflecting back on how this all worked. And then the reply component is down at the bottom, just using a basic discussion board tool here. Visit using the links here, the various projects, and then reply to a few of them. Because of the way this is set up, you want to kind of indicate in the subject line which project or which group you're applying to. But again, there's really like no initial post here necessarily. Responding to at least two different groups. And again, from what I've seen, lots of really interesting comparisons between stories, looking at character, theme, setting, lots of kind of secondary or ancillary research that people have built in. So really fascinating work. This is what I love about how these projects, they start from what is often seems like a fairly simple idea, like, oh, let's compare these two characters, these two stories. And then as you dig deeper and build the thing out, you find all of these other ways in which the stories connect. Again, theme, character, setting, all of those terms that we've been attending to throughout. Okay, so that's Unit 6. Technically, this part should be done already. The reflection and the posting of the main link, the project should be finished. And now you can finish up the response piece. Let's take a look at Unit 7. So we transition into poetry as our next genre or type of writing that we cover. A quick reading assignment and listening assignment here, Mos Def's Hip Hop. It's not really a music video so much as like a YouTube compilation kind of a thing that people have done. And it's interesting because obviously it's a song that you can listen to and hear performed by Mos Def, but it's also treated as a piece of poetry, or it's presented as such in our Norton Intro to Literature. So it already invites us to think about ways in which literature, quote unquote, is a thing that we know will show up in the Intro to Lit textbook, but it also is showing up in lots of different forms, in lots of different places, sometimes where we least really think of literature residing, like Mos Def, for example. So what we're going to do is extend that a little bit using this tool called Padlet, right, that we've run into before. Here's the link to the Padlet. I'll text that out so you have it on your phone. So this is, again, a mobile assignment. And this is like one of the most mobile, or it's the most important that you do this one as a mobile assignment and not just Googling something, not just sitting statically at your computer. It really is crucial that you do this as mobile. So what we're trying to do with this is investigate the way that poetry, again, I almost like put quotes around it and actually did up here, right? It carries this mixed baggage. It's a thing that if you ask the average person, do you read, do you write it? Probably not. So it feels kind of marginal, this thing that has a lot of sometimes negative connotation, like people don't get it, or it's, I don't know, weird, or I don't know, whatever. None of which I agree with, but I acknowledge that that's the misconception about it. And yet, I think there's other ways in which poetry, especially if you think in terms of lyrics, are both really cool to people, really central, like Mos Def as a poet. We don't necessarily think in those terms, or pick your favorite lyricist as poet. We don't really think in those terms. So poetry, again, the idea of the poet has this weird dual existence. It's like really on the outside in some ways, but it's also really central and really visible in so many aspects of our daily lives, whether it's literal poetry being read to mark big public occasions. It often is used to mark major private occasions like weddings, funerals, births, big, important, even if they're just private family moments, the sort of intense moments of our lives. So again, it's funny that we turn to poetry, even though it's in some ways this really marginal thing that nobody ever thinks about. Okay, so having said all that, the idea of the Padlet is to find poetry out there in the world, not in the English textbook that you can pull off the shelf. We know it's there already. Don't find it in sort of like hidden places that you have to go and seek it out. We want it in, if not public spaces, then at least in open, visible spaces. And by poetry, we don't mean like things that are just generally poetic or beautiful or people holding hands or blah, blah, blah. No, we want poetry, literally words arranged in some space on the page or a screen or a sign or a whatever out there in the world. So actual text, okay? So super important that you do this mobily. We want to encounter where poetry is all over the place. You'll be surprised as we begin to populate the corkboard here about how poetry is like everywhere, even though we kind of miss it all the time, hiding out there in plain sight, as I say here. So again, really important that it's text-based as poetry. It has some sense of like line breaks or arrangement on the space of that page. It's not just poetic prose, right? Almost like fiction that we would read. And of course, it's not something you Google. It's not just poetic as in some sort of beautiful scene that you discover. It's actual words, okay? And that's all pretty much we've got cooking for this unit. So sort of a lower key one after our major group project. And then we also have a response set up where you're responding to the images that people post. So again, post the image or the video if you want to do it that way. You can provide a little bit of text sort of explaining what the thing is that we're looking at, why you think it's poetry, where it is out there in the world, and then of course attach your name to it, again, just for grading purposes, and it helps with the response piece as well. Okay, so again, make sure that you've finished up Unit 6. Again, double check to make sure that your project links are showing the way that they need to everybody, not just to you, and then jump on into Unit 7, and we'll get started with poetry. All right, I'll talk with everybody soon. If you have any questions or concerns, you can be in touch with me.